Hello and welcome to Blockchain Gaming World, episode 92. We are creeping our way towards 100. I thought we'd get there a bit quicker, but it's been busy times. Anyway, I'm your host, Jon Jordan, and I'm very pleased that joining me again, I think we were about 6 months ago, but you're back again because you've been doing very important stuff. And we have Yat Siu from Animoca Brands. How's it going, Yat?
Great, it's a pleasure to be here again.
Good. Yes, you're definitely keeping us blockchain game kind of writers, commentators, kind of busy, because I think you kind of continued your massive rate of sort of activity, and I guess that's kind of culminated with this kind of new funding round you've done. So, see if I can get the maths right. So it's $88,888,888, which is sort of very meme, isn't it? It's a meme funding round.
It is a meme funding round, very much in the spirit. Yeah.
Yes. So could you could you explain why the eights? I guess for people who don't know.
Well, first of all, I guess as it is with these things, right? When we were raising around and there was conversation around sort of the $1 billion valuation, everyone's like, oh, you got to raise at least 100 million or 150 or whatever the numbers were. And as a business, actually, at that point we were doing quite well. Frankly, I think a lot of people in the NFT space are doing well. So it wasn't about the money. That was one. And then the second thing is, who said that $100 million is a good number? I mean, seriously, right? It could be 101, it could be 150, 130. What does it really mean, right? And so, I had expressed that view earlier as well, that we think of NFTs as a store of culture. And if it is a store of culture, then let's do a funding round that represents our culture and the culture of NFTs. So we said, what is that number? Well, you know what? Let's go with the number 8. Partially because of our heritage. We are based in Hong Kong, and I guess Chinese culture and the number 8 has, however, also sort of been pervasive throughout the world, right? So the number 8 isn't just something that's considered auspicious just in China, actually. Because of overseas Chinese or other people around the world, people are like, oh, 8, that's kind of a good number. And also you see this in the NFT space, right? People are bidding with 8s, right? Or like the number 8 is more valuable than the number 7. From a pure number standpoint, like from a collection, if you're 7 of 10, shouldn't it be more valuable than 8 of 10? No, someone's picking 8 of 10. Why? Because there's some meaning behind that, right? So just as a big nod to the whole culture aspect, we said, let's go raise that amount of money. And yeah, most the people who got it just loved it because it was kind of different. It was like, yeah, why do you have to raise 100? What does that really mean, right? Just as an aside, there was a very major media outlet, like a traditional finance media outlet, who shall not be named, who said, "Oh, we don't cover any funding rounds that don't raise at least 100 million." Really? Right? Like what? So obviously, totally missing the point here, but also sort of creating some hard barriers around. Oh, you're not serious until you've raised 100, as if that $11 million gap, right? Yeah. Makes any big difference. Right? Anyway, yeah.
No, it was kind of funny. Again, another publication who will remain nameless, and I don't know. Maybe this is on. I don't think this is a kind of a tweet out, so maybe I'm being a little bit mean. But he said that Animoca Brands raises nearly $89 million, and you kind of. That could, maybe it's a meme in and of itself. And again, it's sort of a similar thing to some degree. Is if you were trying to raise kind of 89, but you couldn't quite get over the line of 89.
Yeah, exactly.
Go figure.
Yes, right.
And of course, there is another media outlet that doesn't actually cover blockchain. Another gaming outlet doesn't actually cover blockchain games at the moment. We won't continue that dialogue.
Sure.
The funding round.
Watch that change.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's talk about shoot yourself in the foot. So it's mainly to do with the $1 billion valuation, which obviously everyone likes to see. And there are obviously a few headlines. Animoca Brands now are kind of unicorn. But as you were kind of pointing out, you guys, you've been over the years, you've been kind of quite actively raising kind of quite small amounts. So you don't have a problem kind of funding. You're raising quite a lot. Your games now are raising quite a lot in and of themselves from kind of NFT kind of sales and stuff. So why? And obviously in the press release you kind of say the usual things, we're going to expand and M&A and all that sort of stuff, and I guess that. But do you? Sometimes I guess for companies it can be, you can sort of raise too much, because obviously as soon as you raise, you're getting more investors on board, and more investors sort of, especially for you as chairman of the company, is sort of, I mean, you're very experienced in this, but that's sort of more fingers in the pie or cooks in the kitchen, whatever metaphor you want to use. So, so what exactly is that money for? I mean, is it sort of rainy day money that now's the time to raise, or how do you structure that in your strategy?
Yeah, so generally speaking, our view on NFTs, as we have said already, are sort of building out this sort of digital property rights is so early that this is not about rainy day. We are going to deploy this capital hard and fast to the degree that we can find deals. And one of the main things that we have done that other companies haven't done so far is we acquire game companies with audiences and basically sort of bring them blockchain, as it were, right? I view this as like, we're buying these sort of dictatorship style game environments, and we basically liberate them, basically introducing our brand of sort of capitalism and democracy, as it were, right? And so far, it's worked out quite well for us, and I think it's a model we continue to replicate. And so with more capital, it allows us to basically scale up our acquisitions. It's not even just about the IPs. It's really just also about sort of bringing in those traditional game companies and actually bringing them onto blockchain. But we also found that we can't just instruct them and sort of play nice and say, hey, would you like to have blockchain, because that's kind of cool. Most of them don't, as you well know, don't even trust it, and many of them are actually outright rejecting it. So we're going to have to take them over, right? So that's basically one big reason we're doing that. The other thing for us is that it's very difficult for traditional funds to buy tokens and to buy NFTs. And maybe in the future, and I think actually we're not too far out, people are going to start, from an institutional standpoint, start buying NFTs like people buy property, right? Oh, this is a good real estate, right? You see with Sandbox some of that already developing, but it's not yet quite with the sort of mainstream developers, right? You don't have that quite yet, but I think that will happen as well. But for now, how does a traditional company get into blockchain? And so buying equity is still the most effective way. And to deliver the kind of impact we need, which is really to sort of grow and scale the space, we can't just keep talking to our own echo chamber, which we've very happily been doing. And if you want to raise a couple $1 million, maybe even tens of millions of dollars, you can do that, right? But the crypto space certainly has funds and cash. But if you want to bring mass adoption, if you want to sort of broadcast it to the world, if you want to get into the appropriate sort of marketing and media channels, you're going to start bringing in sort of traditional money that isn't in blockchain, right? It would be hypocritical for us to say we're going to bring blockchain adoption, but thank you, we don't want any of your money, so you can all sort of stay behind. That's not our idea of inclusiveness. So I think what we're doing is sort of signaling the fact that the rest of the world is ready for blockchain investments in a traditional sense, and you should start paying attention. And I would not at all be surprised that a flurry of traditional money is now looking at this and saying, oh, if Kingsway and Rothschilds and those guys are now investing in a blockchain game company, what am I missing out, right? What do I need to understand here? That in itself is as much a powerful signal and perhaps more influential than just, hey, look, we sold tens of millions of dollars worth of NFTs, which in itself is no longer newsworthy, which is kind of ridiculous if you think about it. But that's more like you sold lots of NFTs, okay, right? But it's not the validation we need anymore, right? We've now proven that NFTs could be valuable and that people like them. Now we need to prove that it's not just crypto heads are like, oh, let's do NFTs, but that the rest of the world sees it as well. So I think that's another part, and I think I would say that we're not done yet, right? I think. And clearly the rest of the industry will continue to grow in that fashion.
No, I guess it is interesting, and it kind of plays into the investment side, plays into obviously a general sort of kind of boom times for certainly games, a lot of tech. There's a lot of kind of money floating around looking for something to deploy into, and I guess we come from the mobile game space, and we can kind of see mobile's great, billions of players, but you can kind of see that kind of cycle is done now. I mean, raising $100 million in mobile games is not really going to get you very, 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 very far. So it is interesting, I guess, that there are some trends. There's obviously the rise of blockchain is what we see, and then also the rise of institutions and financial money that is sort of looking now for the next thing. And there's a sort of a lot of it sloshing around. So that was the one thing I was surprised actually about your round, that there were these companies that I hadn't heard of before. So clearly, probably hadn't invested in games, probably hadn't invested in tech before. I mean. Was that sort of an easy sell? Do they sort of get it, or is there a lot of education? You have to start from
No, they get it. They absolutely get it. And I think one of the reasons why they get it is the actual idea that what we're doing is creating a more equitable new framework on the internet, right? And that's the appealing point. And gaming, to us anyway, is the tip of the spear. right? We are actually advancing this because the gamers are actually in these environments that are actually, not free at all, and the business model has become more predatory over time, right? I mean, if you remember the days when we were talking about free to play, it was really meant to be as a way to onboard players in a friendly fashion. This idea that people would spend tens of thousands of dollars in game assets that actually, ultimately has no value at all. It's just about sort of selling you more and more and more and never giving anything back, ended up becoming the business model in and of itself. And there's this case right now in China that's in court with Tencent, and where because of I think it was Dungeons and Dragons. That game basically is being traded. The assets are traded by a third-party platform, and netizens in China are now finding out that Tencent says you don't own any of that for the first time. Because when you buy a digital asset in any game, people don't think that they don't own it. They're buying it, but they don't have a relationship with that asset like we rent a tux, right? We think we own this, and then here's the guy who's running it saying, actually, you don't own any of that, right? And that's why you're not allowed to trade it. And we're going to sue you for millions of dollars for you to stop doing that. That's a big change. And so people understand that. And that's a problem too. So I think mission-oriented, purpose-built VCs who want to obviously make money, but also make the world better, are going to be attracted by this. And we've seen multiple models around this, not just obviously with Animoca Brands, but we're invested in Yield Guild games and a bunch of other ones. They're all kind of similar in that thinking.
I love the way that you think VCs care about making the world a better place.
Well, I mean, I think the idea is behind I think capitalism can be a positive force. It has been, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. Everyone plays their part. Sure, what the outcome may be, we can debate that, right? But you need the money to sort of drive that change, and they're willing to fund that. And I think what I like about this is it's a better way to spend money and to grow the space, rather than the zero-sum mentality. Mobile game investing was very much zero-sum. It was very much about killing the competition, about sort of carving out a space, about not letting anyone in. That's completely different from NFTs and blockchain games.
Yeah. Good. So all the headlines were about you raising almost $89 million. There's a couple of things that you kind of sneaked out, which I kind of thought I'd dig into a little bit. So announced on the same day, but not in the same press release. You announced that you bought Sanrio Digital, which is the digital company behind Hello Kitty. So Sanrio, if I pronounce it right, is the company that owns Hello Kitty. Obviously, a massively successful IP. Not really.
Yes.
I mean, it has done a lot of games, but obviously, it's kind of goes everywhere now. And the digital part is sort of their obviously the digital kind of angle of that. So obviously, we've seen a surprisingly quick move of IP into blockchain. And not particular, and some sort of not weird IP, I shouldn't say that, but things like Dr. Zeus and kind of Care Bears and Smurfs in the sandbox, and some of these ones that I wouldn't have put on the list of these are the first ones going to move to blockchain. So why do you think Hello Kitty was something that you guys wanted to invest in, and how do you think you can sort of what are you going to do with that, as much as you can say at the moment?
Well, first of all, the sort of Sanrio digital IP, which is everything Hello Kitty, Batsmaru, EXO, all of them. It isn't just sort of the rights to do digital stuff with it, but it also includes an existing stable of games, an existing community of users. If you want a hellokitty.com email address, that's part of the deal as well, right? So you've got that whole collection. And the reason, frankly, the deal was done is because of the fact that I personally am involved in that company, which also means that actually the closing of the deal, certainly on my part of the transaction, is subject to shareholder approval. Just to ensure that there's no conflict involved. But depending on what you thought the price was, some might say expensive, some might say cheap. But from a larger IP scale standpoint, it might be considered a relatively attractive deal. That it comes from the fact that it was a deal amongst friends, as it were, right? To see the wider picture amongst what's going on here. Hello Kitty is one of the biggest IPs out there, and as you know, we're all about bringing mainstream adoption through gaming and through IP. And Hello Kitty is certainly one way to bring mainstream adoption, perhaps in one of the most influential ways. The other thing is, of course, Hello Kitty is famous globally, but particularly strong in Asia. And there's a nice correlation between that, because it's also an audience that isn't yet quite sort of open to at least NFT in as much as it is in other areas, which is women. And it is particularly popular in that category. And so I think having that IP, bringing that in, is a way in which we can sort of bring more sort of I guess, digital inclusion with women being interested in that through Hello Kitty. So that's part of that. It is we think a pretty sort of great deal for Animoca Brands. But I think, we had 2 announcements on the same day, and so we decided, we should separate it. And I think obviously the fundraise was the bigger news, but Hello Kitty is certainly nothing to sneeze at. It's certainly a big deal as well.
I actually thought that the money, so I think it was like 15 million Australian, so about 10 million US, which I thought was a total steal. I mean, it's kind of like, that's I think it's going to work out quite well for you. And the other one that was announced, a bit more sort of complex, was the you've done a deal to acquire the assets of a company called Helix One, who ran an accelerator with Hedera Hashgraph.
Correct.
And you guys were actually a couple of years ago, I think, you were one of the first companies to kind of get involved in Hashgraph, Hedera Hashgraph. Not still kind of rolling out like a lot of these kind of new blockchains, and I guess if I ask the question more generally. Animoca Brands has been pretty, solid on Ethereum, because that's kind of where the NFT space is. That's where the early kind of deployment of games was. But you have done over the years, I think you've announced for at least half a dozen other blockchains. So from a commercial point of view, you sitting there as chairman. How do you kind of place your bets on that? I mean, I guess you bet a bit on everything, but at what point do you think this new blockchain, whether it's Hedera or whether it's Harmony or whether it's Binance, I'm trying to think of other ones you've announced for, Flow, how do they sort of play out? Because I guess there's 2 different things. There's one, there's kind of the current year, kind of where or the time before kind of Ethereum 2 launches, and then there's, I guess, the more long term. So how do those different bets play out, and how do you make those bets?
Yeah. So first of all, in general, the space is young and new. But I would say one of the main things that we wanted to do as a content company and as a company that's making digital assets, building essentially the properties, as it were, for these users, it was very important for us that they are as transportable and as composable as possible, and that they would not be subject to censorship. And I think this is a really important part, because, and I'm not at all suggesting that any of these chains we're working on have that risk. It's not about sort of necessarily a risk that there would be, sort of that you lose your assets in any of them. That's not it. But it's much more to do with the freedom to choose to be on a chain or another, because you're really going into that community. And so, you've got lots of technologies that allow you to transfer and bridge assets from one place to another. To me, that will be commonplace. And I have to sort of view that the chains is almost to be viewed as a country, as it is a community in its own way. Okay. And that essentially each of these countries, and chains have a culture, right? You have to say that maybe the culture in Hedera and the culture in Binance Smart Chain and the culture in Ethereum is going to be a little different, right? And some of them are very passionate, some of them are very much sort of fighting against each other, right? But either way, I view the relationships sort of as a kind of quasi-culture wars, right? But that friction is really important, because that friction means choice, right? I think what we've seen today in the internet is a situation where actually choice is made for us, because everything's centralized through the way to listen to music, or the way to discover content, or the way to host services. And we may, I'm certainly no fan of very right-wing stuff and the stuff that, Parler is doing. So I'm not sort of endorsing any of its view, but is it also right that they have absolutely no voice at all? Yeah. And so I think this, to me, is why we work with as many chains as possible. Now, we have had our own interesting history with this, right? In the sense that, we've been deplatformed a few times in our lives, right? We've been deplatformed by the App Store. And by the App Store, in 2011, we were one of the top mobile game companies, actually, right? We had 12 apps in the top 20. And of course, that was what got us in trouble, because we were very prolific in our approach, which, we are doing with blockchain gaming as well now. We're like, let's go really hard, right? And Apple, which didn't have an office in Hong Kong, just removed us from the App Store. And, they didn't contact us. There was no email that went and said, we don't quite like what you're doing. We want to talk to you. What's going on? We were just some nameless organization that was actually doing many things the same way that everyone else in the industry was doing. And we didn't have all the full background. But we were the only ones doing it in Asia at that scale. So yeah, those sounds like a good guy to send a message. So they just removed all our apps. We were banned from the App Store for several years, right? And we really only recovered that relationship because we ended up, Apple ended up opening up an App Store regional office in Hong Kong. And now we have a very great relationship. But a central power decided we don't like you for whatever reason. This is just, they just did, but what did they do? Millions of users lost access to their favorite game. Actually, millions of dollars of money spent in these games was lost. Who lost? Actually, right?
Yeah.
Really, right? The end users lost, but of course we got the blame for it, right? And of course, all the jobs and all the people that were basically working on this stuff, it's completely irresponsible from my perspective. But of course, who are we at that time to go sort of pick up a fight? It's platform rules. It's a system, right? So that was one, and we ended up going to Android and so on. But we lost our pole position, right? So that's one. And then the other one was, we got delisted from the ASX barely a year ago, right? Actually, slightly over a year ago. We were delisted because the stock exchange had struggles with, cryptocurrency and NFTs, right? And we had to make a choice. And so for us, working with multiple chains, a healthy ecosystem means a lot of choice. And how do you have a lot of choice? Is that we build on all of them. And by building on all of them, we also ensure that we build communities in all of them. That means that our assets can be welcome in all these places as well, right? And so you're not just coming into the strange. So I have full expectation that everything we will do will not just be on Ethereum, but will be on Flow, will be on Polygon, will be on Harmony, and for us, right, this is all about sort of making a more sort of inclusive web.
No, it's a good point. I guess we've already seen to some degree your analogy of geographic / communities playing out. I guess not that long ago, you only go back kind of a year, and we had kind of Ethereum, Tron, and EOS with a kind of seen as like the sort of the three. And we, as much as Tron tried to get over not being a chain for gambling, that was just what people wanted to do on Tron. You could release other things on Tron, everyone wanted to gamble. Similar sort of thing with EOS, although there's a bit more sort of gaming on that. But EOS desperately tried to get into DeFi. No one very bothered. So I think it is interesting that there is the technical way in which these blockchains work, but then how sort of people who want to use them. And I guess it's a bit like kind of clustering, isn't it? You always have like kind of jewelry shops in the same bit of town, because once there's a few successful jewelry shops, you open another jewelry shop in that bit of town. So if there's a lot of games on a blockchain, then make another game, because we know people like to play games on it. So I guess it's sort of a self-fulfilling thing. It'll be interesting to see how those different flavors sort of play out.
But it's also, maybe just quickly at this point, sorry, just wanted to add one point, because it's culture, right? So the culture is often with these early chains is defined by the leadership of those businesses, right? It's like building a nation, right? So who builds and constructs a nation is what attracts the kind of people that are there, and how you construct it. What's your governance model? How do you think about equity? How do you think about control, right? And frankly, each of these chains have a slightly different idea. Also, some of these chains say some things and maybe do another thing, right? Like all these things are laid bare, and the consumer then has a choice to say, you know what, I like this, I don't like that, right? And so the governance model, I think, plays a big part as to what people go there. And it's the same way that, we people who prefer to live in the US versus people who prefer to live in China, I don't know that they're wrong either way, although one or the other might very much say, I don't like the way things are run in China, or I don't like the way things are run in the US, right? They each have their preferences. That doesn't make them wrong in terms of choosing to live in those places.
Yes, good. It's interesting you went back in time, and you I guess you correct me if I'm wrong, but you've sort of kind of been in business for kind of two big kind of I don't call them disruptions or waves. So I think I'm right in saying back in the day you were very big in internet in Hong Kong. That was one of your, I think it was maybe your first big business.
We built one of the first ISPs. That's right. Yeah.
And then you've done sort of mobile games, and I guess we like to kind of foresee blockchain as being a similarly big transformation. Having gone through some of these big kind of disruptions, what do you think is sort of the tipping point? Is it purely you get the mass market in, you get the first product with 1 million users, you get the first $1 million of revenue, or are there more kind of subtle things that also play in? And how quickly do you think blockchain kind of gets to that point now?
Well, actually, I think first of all, when it comes to sort of the tipping point, I think we're starting to really scratch on truly the early adopter movements going in. And I think my view on this one, as it was earlier, is that gaming is going to lead that, just because the whole metaverse and sort of digital consumer experience on gaming is natural. So I think that's the one that's going to lead into that from that perspective. I view us as generally sort of late 90s internet in terms of evolution. but with an acceleration pace that will be faster than that of mobile adoption because we have infrastructure in place, right? When people talk about blockchain adoption, it doesn't mean that every single thing we have to do is on chain, right?
No.
I think as long as the assets are on chain first, then you have at least that truth. But afterwards, more and more things will come in. One of the interesting sort of interplays that we're seeing now between getting people going perhaps on chain to buy an NFT, which has kind of become sort of that driver, rather than necessarily buying Bitcoin or Ethereum per se, because that seems expensive or unattainable, is the fact that once they start making money, they actually stay in blockchain because of DeFi. And this is actually interesting as well, right? And the interplay behind that means that there are actually two components that play together. Essentially the financification of games and game assets, as it were, or sort of digital property. And then the ability to realize, wait, hold on a second, I just made some money, that's great. But actually I can make some better yield if I keep it in crypto. Wait, maybe I should put more money into this because actually there is more money to be made on just yield, putting it in there. And these are realizations that people have only once you witness it. The theory is there, right? I mean, we can theorize about blockchain all day and all night, but until someone actually does it, the penny doesn't drop. Rarely does it drop, right? And I think that's what's happened. So I think, to me, that path of adoption will happen faster and faster, because one of the big things about sort of diffusion of innovation is the social aspect of that connection. Like how many people are talking about it, how many people are referencing it, and controversy. Right? And this is the thing. The fact that people hate NFTs as well is actually adding fuel to the fire. Right? If we all sat here and said NFTs are great, wonderful for the artists, move on. Right? It's not a story anymore, right? Yeah. But because actually there's passionate discourse on both sides of the aisle, we're keeping this conversation alive, and it's one that money can't buy. Right? So from my perspective is that for the next 12, 18 months, we're going to hit mass adoption sort of growth in the same way that we've seen mobile phone adoption. I think, we used to say million users sort of having NFTs is great. I think we're talking tens of millions of users going on NFTs, at this rate, much sooner than we think. Also, big game companies, they're now paying attention. The number of companies that are sort of have woken up to, what? There's a gaming unicorn that's doing NFTs? What am I missing, right? Yeah. If not for the big companies that are at least paying attention, certainly all the smaller companies that are like, okay, right, we need to do something here, right? So this whole thing is going to sort of move very rapidly, I think.
No, I think from what I've heard from a few people, there are some of the big kind of US listed companies that are not publicly looking in that area, but are trying to position sort of teams and thinking how they can get in. I guess we have Sega announcing it's doing NFTs, Hasbro announced it's got an NFT team up. They're not the biggest, I suppose, but I guess we're kind of starting to see kind of these kind of I guess I'm trying to think of a good analogy, the kind of the shark fins popping up or something. I don't know. And I think it's interesting, kind of what you've pointed out several times, that I think this is kind of led by the consumers in a way, and I think it's interesting the free-to-play thing. I think you're correct. It kind of started out as a way of allowing kind of people to play games without having to spend money, and that was kind of seen as being good for the gamers. But then quickly, people realised that you had to have games that people could spend $100,000 in, and that was kind of that took the market a certain way. But I think because people think they own their in-game kind of assets, and I guess they would certainly argue morally they feel like they should do. And then when the realization kind of comes that they don't, and there is these other games starting to come out where you actually do, and then it plays into the meme thing again with you with your funding round and Elon Musk and
yes.
Doge and all that sort of but that all kind of plays into the thing that and obviously it kind of helps if the number does go up and people make money. But I kind of think even if people realize they can buy something and then sell it, maybe they don't make more money. But as soon as they kind of understand that kind of they can do that. I think that's kind of a good way that you say they make a bit of money and they go try to put more in there. And that was certainly 3 years ago how I kind of started out. You just put like $10 in, and how does this thing work? And over time it builds up. And as more of those stories go into the mass media, then that sort of, I guess, gives people a sense that this isn't about kind of criminality and terrorists and that sort of stuff. It's incredible how strong that sort of again another meme is that people still think Bitcoin's all about terrorism. It's like. Well,
yes.
What do you think people use dollars for? Yeah.
That's right. Correct. They don't understand.
So there was one thing I'm going to kind of cycle back to that you mentioned, and you have been sort of buying some companies who just make games that you're going to kind of bring onto the blockchain, and you have some of your own games. So the Crazy Heroes is your most successful mobile game, and you're bringing blockchain to that. And Quid, I guess, is the other interesting example of a digital sort of marketplace that wasn't on the blockchain. You're kind of thinking why, and you're bringing it to the blockchain. Sometimes my view is at the moment we haven't really seen, or I haven't seen. Correct me if I'm wrong. A non-blockchain game audience being successfully kind of migrated over, because I think even for something like Quid, I think is which you think would be kind of straightforward to do, there is actually some quite subtle changes that you're making to a product that people have been using for a couple of years, a year or so, and as someone who used Quid quite a lot, I'm not entirely sure that I know what they're doing moving stuff to the blockchain. So I wonder, is that actually, that process, I think is actually, it may be successful because you've got a big audience and you can take a few %, but is that actually a harder way of dealing with stuff than actually sort of launching new products?
So I would say, we have multiple examples, right? I mean, one of it's obviously with F1 Delta Time or with Sandbox, although Sandbox was actually really sort of the reinvention of an existing asset with an existing audience base. So it's kind of a hybrid approach. But with F1 Delta Time, it was definitely something that we built from scratch. And I think one of the things that it was built from scratch with a blockchain sort of audience in mind. And you can tell, right? I mean, it's got staking, wallet integration and everything, and it's actually quite complex, right? But the other thing that we learned on this experience, though, is that once a user goes past that hump, which is a difficult learning hump, but once they go past that hump, actually, they're in it for the long run, because they start to understand, wait, I can make some money from this, I can yield, I can do this. And actually, they enjoy the complexity. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that's true for everyone, right? Because we're at this early stage. The early adopters, the innovators, they just love complexity. Like, just make it more complicated. Yeah, I love that, right? It's like, here's a puzzle to solve. Hey, did you figure that out, right? I mean, that's one category of gamer and user as well, right? But obviously, that's not going to bring mass adoption in the traditional sense. So for Quid, for instance, though, the awareness that we have brought for users trading Quid and blockchain, even though they haven't yet opened a wallet because we haven't opened that up yet, is actually quite high. Okay. And the reason why is because the Atari and most recently Blockchain Heroes mintables actually are the ones that are trading the highest on the Quid marketplace. Right. And you kind of go, why is that? Why is it trading more than Game of Thrones or all the other ones? Because those are actual mintables. So actually what we're doing is inadvertently, by the friction of the blockchain guys and the non-blockchain guys, we're now chasing for this asset because they know that if you turn this into an NFT, it has more value, right? So that's the first sort of, why is it more valuable? Because the person really owns it and he can sell it somewhere else. Yep. And so the activity in Quid has never been higher. Quid has turned a profit for the very first time 2 months ago, right? Okay. As a big milestone, right? And that wouldn't have been possible if it didn't do what it's doing. But it intentionally did it with cash accounts. Because, Michael's, the CEO and sort of co-founder of Quid, his favorite expression is that most of his players are like moms from Iowa, right? That's how he describes it, right? And mom in Iowa is not going to have sort of a MetaMask wallet, and certainly will not even know how to buy crypto. So we have to do a cash way. So he approached it from a cash first approach and fast cash in, cash out. And that took off really, really, really fast as a kind of meta to crypto. But the crypto guys are going in and they're saying, when can I finally deposit my crypto so I can actually go in and start really buying? Right? Yes. So the other thing that's interesting about Quid, because I think it's probably the best digital collecting experience as far as mobile is concerned, is that it is now in a situation where actually more people can participate through action. So they can collect and play actually with very little money. And if they chance upon, or create that set that's valuable, they can sell it to a whale or they can sell it to someone who wants to build a set. And actually created a very interesting flywheel, economic flywheel of participation at the app level and sort of engagement and purchasing. It's almost as if, instead of us selling rare goods to instead of us selling rare goods to the collector, it's actually our players selling rare goods, because the way to get those rare goods is by playing Quid. And you have to pay like $9 or $10 or $20, but if you're willing to spend the time and to play and engage and trade, you get that. So actually, I think Quid is proving the business model, because in the future, we're not going to talk about blockchain games, right?
No.
We're not going to talk about
I hope not.
blockchain NFTs. Yeah, I hope not. If we still are 10 years from now, then we will have failed, right? It's like people don't say internet gaming, right? So it's the same thing here. And so how do you translate that? Oh, because it has the utility. And so the utility is value. The utility is trade. The utility is liquidity in this case for my digital assets. And so cash is that metaphor that is so well understood by most of the world. And by introducing crypto, we're just going to sort of supercharge the liquidity. But right now, even without crypto, people trade already very happily. And, people are cheering on $50, right? Because they haven't yet discovered what can happen when you go to NBA Top Shot land or F1 Delta time. But that's about to happen. And I think, to me, Quid is going to be it's just at the cusp of something really, really big because it has the largest digital collecting audience in the world today.
Is it? Okay. Well, I'll have to double my efforts. After a bit, I've not been involved in the Atari stuff. I'm still collecting the Marvel ones. That seems to be my kind of what I've got collections.
Right.
Not very good collections, I have to say. But, it is worth generally for people who are listening. It's worth checking out kind of Quid. I think because it is that closest kind of thing that it's a good analogy you make. You kind of have to try and think, why did they try and do this without the blockchain? I guess they were like two years ago, so you kind of probably couldn't have done it on the blockchain yet.
Oh no! So Quid started actually in 2016.
Oh, was it a long time ago then? Actually.
So yeah. So the interesting thing about Quid though is that it started in 2016. Michael, who used to work at Tops, basically leading the digital effort, completely understood the potential. He was the head of digital at Tops, right? Yeah. So he's like, oh wow, my goodness, everyone's going to collect digital stuff, so we should do that. And then he went and raised money from Sequoia, but it was no blockchain and no NFTs at the time. Yeah. So, kind of slightly missed the mark just because the idea was right. The idea was there, but, didn't quite hit it because we didn't yet have sort of the decentralized solution for that. And now he gets it. But what it also means, speaking of Marvel and all the other ones, is that there are assets from 2016 and 2017 and 2018. So you've got some very OG material in there that are actually, we think, potentially valuable.
Good. Okay, top tip. So we're sort of coming to the end of our half an hour. We could obviously go on for a while, but I think that half an hour is probably enough, 40 minutes. How do you see kind of the next kind of 6 months, kind of 2021 playing out? I mean, it's always a difficult question because we know these things can go. Nothing can happen for 6 months or a year, and then something can happen very quickly. I mean, we're going through. I guess we've gone through another kind of volatility phase where everything kind of bombed up. Or in 2021, the kind of crypto prices have bombed up, and now we're going through like over the weekend we've had like another sort of crash down, and I guess we're a little bit used to that because we've been in the space for a while. But some people think the end of the world's happening, and do you think how quickly do you think kind of blockchain games will sort of carve out its own little space, and that kind of audience won't really worry what's going on with sort of Bitcoin and Doge and all this sort of things, and it'll become a gaming space that we can just go kind of nice games that we're playing and people are onboarding for that. Is that going to happen this year, or is that going to be next year?
It's going to happen this year. And so our conviction on the fact that people are going to be playing sort of games that use blockchain technology to own their assets and basically all that stuff is going to, not necessarily mainstream in the sense that mobile games wasn't mainstream in 2011 either, but it was big, right, in terms of numbers and usage. I think this is the year where we're going to have our sort of mobile 2011, 2012 moment. I think, next 12 months, so maybe it spills in potentially a little in the early part of 2022, but I actually think it's going to happen because many of the games that are currently being developed are sort of ready for launch time. Not just us, but sort of a whole bunch of other companies are doing stuff in that space. And the narrative around that is becoming clearer and clearer. Every time sort of Elon starts talking about some crypto, some Doge, some environmental thing about Bitcoin, whatever it is that he does, and he sends the markets flying one way or the other, down or up, right? He still keeps the conversation alive, right? And the controversy that's out there is just giving more awareness about that space. And there will be a moment where Elon's going to start saying NFT. I just don't know when, right? Yeah. And so that awareness is going to keep growing. The other thing is, it's not just the money that's saying, like classic investors saying, oh, I get digital property rights, that could be the future. Think of all the influential people who are artists, creators, actors, celebrities. They're all into NFTs. But why are they into NFTs? They're not into NFTs just because they could make a quick buck. Some may be, right? But many of them understand the power behind it, a
Yes.
relationship with my customer, actual sort of equity against the labels, the way that I can actually make a real profit share, that whatever that is, right? There are many actual long-term, practical, purposeful reasons why the entire creative and sort of influential community of the world wants NFTs to succeed, right? So that to me is one of the other big reasons why NFTs are not just here to stay, but moving much faster, because they're all getting into the game. One of our other portfolios, Bitski, right, just raised a nice round. But they raised it from like an A-list of influencers as well,
Yeah.
not just VCs, right? Why are they putting their hard spent money? Usually, sort of those type of people don't put in money in venture capital companies or risky companies, and there is plenty of risk. So don't get me wrong here, but they're doing it because they know the future they want to see, and that's why I think NFTs are going to be sort of moving ahead in an unstoppable force, because it's not just about crypto guys saying, "Oh, let's make this work." It's the most influential people who sort of guide our lives, influence us, tell us about sort of the things we should love and see. They're the ones telling us to look at NFTs.
Yeah. Actually, a good point there. Mark Cuban, obviously, well into blockchain and Bitcoin and NFTs, and he invested in one of your companies as well. One of the companies you invested in, the Axie Infinity developer.
Axie Infinity, yeah,
Maybe
that's
this
right.
guy as well. So it is interesting that I guess it's playing into another trend that we are seeing kind of rich sportsmen and angel investors becoming more active in and of themselves in the investment space with all this money floating around, and they are much more open to these sort of new things. And in general, I think even on your raise, you do have these kind of individuals or these individuals who've raised a lot of money and have their own sort of investment accounts, kind of getting involved in these things as well. So it's not just the kind of the big investor kind of money coming in; it is all these other people who actually between them have probably trillions of dollars. Excellent. Thank you very much for your time as ever. Yeah, we will leave it there. I'm sure in 6 months' time you will have filled up the lever, and we'll have to have another chat about all the crazy things you've been doing and all the successes. So I look forward to that.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to you listeners and viewers for listening to our conversation. Please subscribe through your podcast channels. Please subscribe through YouTube as well. Every week we are talking to the people who are building this crazy new world of blockchain gaming, which we really think is going to be taking over, and hopefully at some point we won't talk about blockchain games anymore, and I have to rename my podcast. But maybe I've got a year or so to do before that. Anyway, thanks for listening, and come back next week.